Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is a live edition of the Jake Feinberg Show, coming on Power Talk. Please go to our website, powertalk.live. Download our free app to your smartphone so you can stream all of our live local programming, including Solomon on Blast, the Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, the Jake Feinberg Show. Can't thank you enough for making us part of your day today. And without further ado, I want to bring in a cat who has been working behind the scenes in the industry for some time, collaborating and working very closely with, most notably, the legendary promoter Bill Graham of Bill Graham Presents, and he now heads up his own operation called Second Octave. And looking forward to getting down with him today. Morty Wiggins, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's great to be with you. You know, we have a game on this program called Name That Voice. I'm going to put this in for you right now, and we'll come back and we'll break it down.
Okay.
Well, they were in Oakland.
They were in Oakland at that
Fantasy was never in San Francisco. It was Circle Records when it was in San Francisco. It was owned by the Weiss brothers, Max and Saul Weiss. And Saul Zantz was the sales manager. And he got together a group of limited partners and bought the company, changed the name to Fantasy Records, and moved it over to Oakland, West Oakland, 30th and Peralta. They would drive by and machine gun the front of the building. You know, they'd bust in and steal the typewriters.
It was a small place. It was small.
It was out in the middle of nowhere, you know, and funky part of Oakland for sure. And then Creedence made all that money. And we built the new facility, and that's when I started building and designing studios.
Because I was talking to Merle Saunders' son, Merle Saunders Jr.
I just ran him the other night.
Merle Saunders Jr.
So I'm at the party for Studio D, had their little holiday party. So my buddy Morty Wiggins, do you know Morty?
No.
He was Bill Graham's vice president, and he was general manager of A&M. We're close friends. Anyway, he said, I'll go with you. So he's talking to this black guy, and I walk over, and he said, oh, do you know each other, Jim Stern, Merle Sanders? And Merle's like this big now. Well, I've known Merle since he was a baby. They were little kids when.
Well, you know who that is blabbering away?
Oh, yeah, that's my friend Jim Stern.
Oh,
yeah,
dude, what a
fun man.
I mean, really one of the most humble and legendary cats that consistently walks on this planet. And so when he dropped your name, I was not hip to you, and so it's really great. I kind of wanted to just talk to you about, before you came to the West Coast, who was this folk psych act that you were following around in the New York area?
Well, I actually came out to California with them. The first band that I worked with, who I've remained very close friends with to this day, was a folk rock band called Collins and Levine. The lead singer and rhythm guitar player was Doc Collins, and the lead guitar player and second vocal was 70, I don't know, early mid-70s. Not very good.
How did you get? I mean, because Jim, it was hard to drag it out of him, but he, the guy was essentially a ridiculous R&B drummer for Fantasy. He was the studio drummer for Fantasy, but were you ensconced in the music biz?
No, not at all. No. I was a young man. I was when I first met them, I was 18 years old, and I had come from a business-oriented family. My father was a businessman, and so he brought me into the business world at a very young age, and I had a head for it. And then as I became a teenager, I started going to concerts and got turned on to music. And music was everything back then. This was like the early '70s, and it was, music was the prime mover. Just really being into music, and so when I moved out of my parents' home and I moved into a place with some friends, some musicians lived on the same street, and that was the band that I met. And I mean, back then, there was, no one offered any kind of training, no less college degrees. in the music industry, you learn just by keeping your eyes and ears open. And I was a pretty ambitious young man and knew how to keep my eyes and ears open and pay attention. And so I asked them if I could manage them, if I could work with them, and they said, well, why not? Back then, they were pretty young too, so I started hanging out with them and working with them. And the first thing I did was I got them on this college coffee house circuit, which was happening back then in the 70s, and it was a circuit of college coffee houses at public university. Well, actually, some private universities too. It was like a booking agency. And I got them an audition for this agency, and they were accepted and sent out on a bunch of college tours, and that was really good for them. That was really good for their development. And then the band, the two guys, decided. At that point, it was a trio. It was two guitars and a bass, and they decided to go out to California because Doc's older brother lived in Santa Rosa. And so I decided to tag along, and so I booked a tour for them in the Midwest, and then they drove out to California from there. And myself, wanting the experience that I've heard many other people had, I hitchhiked across country from New Jersey and met them in California, and been here off and on ever since.
Do me a favor. Are you on a landline, by the way?
No, I'm on my cell phone. I don't have a landline.
Yeah, maybe just lower the volume on it a little bit. You're
Sure.
You're a little bit hot on your vocals, but
okay.
So you said music was everything. I was born in '78, and I music for me now is a completely healing venture. It's taken on a whole new significance about letting the body dance. Can you say fundamentally your consciousness was altered by live music?
Well, my consciousness was definitely altered by the live entertainment experience. When I was in high school, I really got into theater, and after I was finished with high school, before I left home, I was going into New York City and working in some off Broadway theaters. And so I really more got hooked in the live performance, and that was altering for me. The excitement of being in live performance and not knowing what was going to happen, and the interaction with the audience. That's what really hooked me. And then, as I got more and more into music, the live concert scene really spoke to that. So it wasn't only the message of the music, which was very powerful at the time. But it was also the live concert experience that really got me. That really hooked me.
We're talking like early '60s.
No. We're talking like early '70s. Yeah.
Okay, so
yeah.
I mean,
60, from '69,
yeah.
from '68.
Yeah.
Yeah, '68 to like
Did
already in California.
Well, no. So I mean, I guess
right.
so it's fair. I mean. You were in Jersey? Is that where you grew up?
Well, I was born. I grew up in the metropolitan New York area. We moved around quite a bit when I was younger. I was actually born in Toronto, but we lived in Flatbush. We lived in Kew Gardens. Then we lived in by Paterson, New Jersey, and then I came out west.
So I'm curious about, the idea of, if you could paint the picture of sort of the idea, the significance, either through theater or music. I mean, Art Blakey had this classic line where he would talk about, he felt his job was to wash away the dust of everyday life for those people that were coming in to experience his quartet or quintet or whatever he had. And, I mean, this is sort of more of an existential question, but I think one of the crises facing my generation and younger is just the idea that in society today, especially in the West, being a musician is no longer seen as a profession. And it's you can pay to play, you can play for the door. Turn it on its head. I just did a question and answer at the Brava Theater in the Mission District this past summer, celebrating Woodstock 50 with Greg Arico and Michael Shreve, who were the original drummers for Sly Stone and Santana.
Okay.
And, the crazy thing is that, Santana didn't even have a record out. Bill Graham sent a cassette to the promoter of the concert. He chose Santana. So it spoke to me and said, wow, again, Latin rock had not yet, sort of gotten its tentacles into Western society. But, can you talk a little bit about, obviously it was exciting for the improv component of it and the fact that maybe you would, touch that and get involved with it and all that stuff. But were artists treated as professionals at that time?
Well, were artists treated as professionals? I have to say no. I have to
Really?
say no because
Wow.
well, only because if they were treated as professionals, they would have got paid. They would have got paid fairly, and up until probably, I don't know, 15 years ago when digital files first came on board, and so the business started to really change and the power started to shift from the promoters and the record companies and whatnot to the artists, and artists could put out their own music and whatnot. Artists never got paid fairly. Never got paid fairly. Whether it be on the live performance side, on concerts, or on recorded music, artists were always appeased. They would, you get a cash bonus, you get, some kind of settlement, if you found out that your record company was ripping you off, which happened most of the time. Really, virtually any time you audited a record company, you always found money, always. And getting a fair back-end payment off of a concert wasn't, really wasn't that easy, at all, until ticketing became digitized as well, and then and automated. So then at that point, you could get a ticket manifest that was computer generated off of actual scans and coming in, as well as sales off of digital platforms. And so you could get a more accurate, I don't know if say 100%, but 95% accurate accounting. But up until that point, the digital world came upon us, artists, I'm not saying they were treated poorly, but when you ask professionally, to me, part of being treated professionally is that you're paid what you're due. You're paid what you earn, and that hardly ever happened.
I'll push back a little bit by saying that in New York, for instance, in the tri-state area, and again, obviously there were cats like Grant Green and, God forbid, there were jazzers who didn't know how to advocate for themselves, and maybe they'd get paid in junk, like heroin or something like that. But the truth is, there was something called radio registry, and for a lot of guys, they pick up the phone and I've interviewed 1,500 of these session musicians, and from all different walks of life. And once you got into that, Jim and Andy's was a big bar on 52nd Street at one time, and these guys would get called for jingles and commercials and record dates and soundtracks. And the point is, you could get away with living in a loft down in the West Village for $400 a month. So you could actually get ahead.
Yeah.
And what I'm trying, if you were booking these cats, excuse me, I don't remember the name of the band, but if you're booking them on a coffee house circuit, they're walking away with cash in their pocket, and they're able, is it fair to say, I'm not saying that they were, buying, 2-car garage and, all this stuff, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm not talking about, you made a very good point about digital files and maybe fairness, so to speak, and again, record companies at a certain period in our history, it almost just seems like a fantasy because it was the primary listening medium. The records would make so much money that a lot of times the record companies would just write off losses on tours, But I guess my point is that there were avenues for cats because of the cost of living. There were avenues to get by, and they could be, one day they could be playing commercials or Johnny Cash. And I just want you to, maybe you weren't aware of that at the time, but I just feel like that today, there's such a lack of authenticity in making music today. And then on top of that, if you're not a name, if you're not a big, I mean, it's great the Tower of Power and Journey and Steve Miller can go on these $1 million summer tours, but it's like Santana was a no name and they became a sensation overnight. That would never happen today.
Well, it's hard to say whether it would happen or not, and it's hard to say whether it happened overnight, because, the appearances is that it happens overnight, but then, usually there's many years of preparation and struggle that go into that before that, that movement comes to a national spotlight
Sure.
and national awareness. But,
Sure.
what I was really speaking about, certainly there are studio and session musicians that, that get paid through the union, that get paid through the performing rights societies when it comes to residuals. And that's fairly transparent, especially on the union side for sessions. And yeah, back when the cost of living was a lot less, you could make a decent living. But, the truth of it is that throughout history, artists have always struggled. Artists have always been poor. Artists have always struggled. Artists have always depended on the kindness of, not necessarily of strangers, but of benefactors.
Absolutely. That's exactly.
And I was speaking more about, a certain level of the business, not so much, the session guys or people who would record jingles, because you're right. When you do that stuff, you're fairly compensated. But no, I have to say, even on the residual side, if you know anything about how the performing rights societies like ASCAP and BMI pay, they don't pay per play.
Definitely not.
They pay on a curve. They have a secret formula that's based on the artists that have the highest impressions and the artists that don't have no impressions, and there's a curve in between. And so the lion's share of the money that performing rights societies collect goes towards the top 50 artists that are on the high side of the curve. And so even if you might have impressions that have been generated in the marketplace, if you're on the very, very low end of the curve, you might not get paid at all. Because it's actually not a play-for-play payment. It's based on a curve with the performing rights societies.
I dig. You're firmly ensconced in this. I just look at, it's just, I do feel like we live in such it wasn't such a data-driven society. Everything is quantified now. And like you talked about before, music was everything back then. And frankly, spiritual music is unquantifiable. And so, if you can't quantify, if you're not going to, pay per play or whatever, and you're just going to, sort of, if there's no way to quantify that, then, and I guess the overarching point is just, I do want to promote, my show is really dedicated to leadership, love, overcoming adversity, and the lineage of all music. And I really want to be able to at least create a template for my daughters and future generations' understanding of how real music is made. And I just feel like in this paradigm, especially with the greed factor, have you ever seen the greed factor can you point to something? Obviously, bands got ripped off, or they lost a couple $1,000s, or but Creedence Clearwater, and maybe that was because they didn't know any better, but all the money they made from those records, they had plenty of money for their own, and all that money trickled down to all these crazy albums that a lot of them Jim Stern recorded, a lot of jazz, a lot of black jazz. It just I'm not peddling socialism, but this berserko capitalistic model is not good for music. That's just the way I feel about it in this. Do you feel that way about this time, or is there glimmers of hope that I'm missing?
There were two things that really changed our business significantly.
Yeah.
Before the arrival of digital files, which turned everything upside down. And one is when the Clinton administration deregulated media ownership, and so corporations could own more than one radio station, they could own a radio station, a TV station, and a newspaper in the same market.
Right.
And then it got and then it went even further. Deregulation, where you can own multiple radio stations in a market, you could dominate a market, and then music started to be programmed on a national basis more and more rather than a local basis, and it became extremely difficult to break a new act or a smaller act or an independent act because the cost of doing business on a national level, especially in this country, because it's a big freaking country, and with wide demographics. It's really expensive to try and work and launch something on a national basis. So it became the purveyor of record companies because they were the only ones that had deep enough pockets. So that was the one thing, was the deregulation of media ownership. And
I just want to be clear before you go on, when you say that, because I did a couple interviews with the late great pianist Joe Sample from the Crusaders, and he was like, we had one time had 300 independent record companies, and then it went down to what do we have, 6 now? So is that a product of deregulation?
Yeah, I think so. I think that, and the fact that record, and this is once again, when back in that day, record companies were cash cows. I mean, there was an incredible amount of cash.
Yeah,
an insane amount of cash.
Insane.
And so the second big change was that corporations started to become aware and learn that record companies were cash cows, and so record companies were targeted and were acquired by multinational corporations, and that was a huge change because back when I first got into the music business, the record companies were headed by really strong, powerful, creative, mostly men, but who made creative decisions and that were not based only on quarterly returns. But once the corporations bought the record companies, then the whole way of doing business changed. We had to forecast records for a year that we didn't even we hadn't even begun recording. It changed the way that the record companies approach business. Whereas, before, when record companies were privately owned, if you believed in an act, you would make 3 or 4 records with them, and they would hopefully break. Like a band that I was associated with back when A&M Records was still owned by Herb Alpert and Jerry Moss, Blues Traveler.
Sure.
They didn't break until their 4th album. And they wouldn't have even gotten that chance these days. They would have been 1 and out. Maybe 2.
What year was that's interesting. That's so good to hear that. What year did they break? Do you remember?
That was early 80s, mid 80s.
Yeah, late 80s. I remember getting hip to them.
Yeah.
The other thing guys like Jack Holtzman or Ahmet Ertegun, but was there in your mind a turning point when because for a long time I remember Densmore, John Densmore and I caught a hang, and he was talking about Elektra was really a boutique private label. I mean, it was just some really funky psychedelic rock bands. This is right around the time that Morty Wiggins is marinating in the late 60s, and you look at these albums, you're like, this is bizarre. It's like organ, drums, horns, and you don't even know who these people are. But it was what Densmore said was, you know what? As long as the brass was making money, they stayed out of the way of the producers and the musicians to do that work, to do what they do best.
That's right.
And then all of a sudden, it seemed to me the bean count, as you said, you made the reference to say that corporations got smarter, or they just seemed to get their tentacles more involved in things they knew nothing about. So as a result, they were dictating stuff that musicians should be making the calls about, or that producer. Was there a definitive time when it was beyond it was beyond profit? They needed to have full creative control over things they knew nothing about.
Well, I'll tell you, I don't really think I don't think that record companies are really interested in creative control. As far as if it doesn't affect the bottom line, it doesn't affect their forecast. We had a situation where when I was at A&M Records, where Sheryl Crow, on her first record, I forgot the title of the song, but the song talked about a young person going into a Walmart and buying a gun, and so the sales department, when they heard the song and they were out soliciting, raised a flag and said, "Ooh, this could be a problem." And because Walmart was, if not the biggest, maybe the second biggest account in the country, retail account in the country. And sure enough, Walmart, listened to an advanced copy of the record before they placed their order, because Cheryl was a new artist at the time, and had a big problem with it, and said they weren't going to take the record unless that lyric was edited. And everyone wanted to take the reference to Walmart out. And Cheryl, of course, didn't. And the chairman of A&M at the time, this is after Herb and Jerry sold the company to Polygram, to Phillips, Al Cafaro, said, "No, we're going to stand by our artists. We're not going to change the lyric." And he got a lot of heat. He got a lot of heat about that. And Walmart didn't take the record. It became a big hit anyway.
It sort of broke both ways on that.
Really,
Yeah, it's interesting.
No one really cared. No one was really involved in
Right.
her process until it affected the bottom line, until it might affect the forecast. That's the only thing that the record companies really cared about. They weren't so much interested in creative control for the sake of creative control. They were only interested in creative control as to how it affected the bottom line.
Yeah, I think maybe more to the point that I was trying to make was that originality, or as the idea of experimental music. Again, we have so many platforms now to disseminate material, so we're saturated with content. But when it really was a record-based industry, it seemed to me like you had all sorts of interesting acts that were, getting their albums pressed. And now I just feel like we're in a time of huge conformity and a huge amount of comping and a huge amount of cover bands. And again, this is tied into the lack of authenticity in rhythm, especially with, I've talked to so many great drummers, and they'll be in a room somewhere, and they'll hear some drums, and they'll say that's got to be a machine, and they'll walk in and it's a human being playing drum parts. I guess I'm just talking about if all you're hearing is digital beats crunched into people's ears, you're not going to be able to detect authenticity. And it goes back to what you said. This whole idea of music was everything, and now music is made for pacification. It's made for multitasking. I don't want to speak in huge broad brushes, but I just say, in your mind, how has the significance of music changed in our culture from the time that you were coming up until now?
Yeah. Once again, I think that if you were going to connect the dots, the line would go straight from creativity to money, to the forecast.
The forecast. Yes.
Yeah, the forecast of sales.
Yes.
Which is everything because most of these corporations that own these record companies, most of them are publicly traded companies, and so they're really, really focused on quarterly results. And it's no way to run a creative business. It's not vacuum cleaners. You can't just pump out, okay, well, let's just make 1,000 more vacuum cleaners.
You're nailing it. You're nailing it. Yeah.
To the CFO, who was a Polygram person, not necessarily a label person. And so, when I first started there, I tried to take my job seriously, and I did a realistic forecast based on what I thought on the history of the artists and, the records that were coming out. And so I submitted it, and the CFO just looked right down at the bottom line and said, "That's not good enough." So I went back, and I was a little more liberal, a little more aggressive. Submitted it, looked at it, and said, "That's not good enough." I said, "Well, this is what I think we're going to do." And the person looked at the list of releases that were part of the forecast and said, well, "Sting's not on here," who was on A&M and who was a big, multi-platinum artist. I said, "Well, Sting's not on there because we don't know when the Sting record's coming out. He hasn't even told us he's starting to record it." He said, and the CFO said, "Well, put it in the fourth quarter." just to make the number, right? Just to make the number.
Right,
so,
right.
You know, if Sting did do a record and it became a hit and it hit the number that I put in there, then it would all look great. And if Sting didn't make a record, which we didn't think he didn't tell us he was going to, or he didn't make the number, then we would look like idiots and maybe even get fired, and and there'd be more control exerted over us. And it really had nothing to do with us because it's not vacuum cleaners. There's an alchemy in music, and there's an alchemy in the business, in the music business, and that's probably the one thing that keeps me engaged to this day in the business, is that it's a very creative business, and every day when you wake up, you're not quite sure what's going to happen because you're dealing with musicians and you're dealing with art, and there's no formula. There's really no formula for art. And,
no, I did. I mean, it's. I'm going to read you this quote. Wish I had it queued up on the audio, but I'm going to read this to you, and then we'll riff on it. He said, "This cat said, I was working at Tony's bar from midnight till 4 in the morning. Neil Anderson." Came back and approached Tony about bankrolling this little theater they had on 2nd Avenue and 4th Street, which was the Anderson Yiddish Theater. It was theater and music, but all in Yiddish, all Jewish theater. From what I hear, Michael Tilson Thomas's family was involved with the theater. They needed like $15,000, and Tony went for it. He brought me over there. I was an usher, but the place was totally chaotic, so I started organizing it. I get a call one day from Tony. He thought of me as his muscle, although I never thought of myself that way. He said, this promoter from California wants to talk to me. They set a meeting at the Tin Angel on Bleecker Street, right above the bitter end. We order some food and we're waiting for this promoter to show up. Tony thought of himself as a semi-wise guy. He grew up in Brooklyn and went to school with 2 of the nephews of Carmine Lombardozzi, who was one of the mafia dons in Brooklyn. He thought he was connected, but he really wasn't. This guy walks in with a big shoulder bag and introduces himself as Bill Graham. I'd never heard of Bill. He seemed like a pleasant enough guy. He opens up his bag and takes out all these yellow legal pads and starts talking about how he's been doing shows out on the West Coast for several years now, and he has great relationship with the acts and managers and their agents. He's been to the Anderson Theater and was very impressed by the way it was run, the technical aspect of the whole thing. He thought together we could really do something in New York. At this point, Tony stops slurping his soup and goes totally off the charts. It was like a bad Jimmy Cagney impression. Who the F are you coming into my town and tell me you're going to be my partner? Bill is taken aback but doesn't say a word. Finally, Tony stops and Bill says, well, thank you for your time. I'm sorry you're not interested. He shakes my hand and Tony totally ignores him. I said, Tony, there's something here and I think you're making a really big mistake. The Fillmore East opened just about a month after that. Bill must have had the whole thing in the process, and he wasn't asking Tony to let him into his operation. He was inviting Tony to become part of his, which Tony never realized. A month later, the Fillmore East opens up, and Tony is totally out of business. His whole tech staff jumped. I didn't because I was his friend, so I stayed with him. I stayed with him until the opening night of the Fillmore East with Big Brother and 10 Years After and Albert King. Tony told me that day that he had printed up 2,000 counterfeit tickets to Bill's show. He was trying to disrupt the whole thing, which for me crossed the line, and I walked on him. Bill had it under control, and it was a great show. It was the opening of a whole new era in New York for rock and roll music. At that point, I disconnected with Tony. I was friends with a bunch of people from the Fillmore East, and about 3 or 4 months later, I got a job there as an usher. I was there a couple of months, and they had fired the house manager. It goes on, basically Bill, that was Jerry Pompili. Did you know Jerry?
Oh yeah, I know Jerry well.
Yeah. So that story was from, I don't know if you ever heard that story before, but I mean, that was essentially the opening of the Fillmore East. And, it's, I just wanted to get your, well, first of all, were you involved with this Jewish theater? Was these kinds of the theaters you were you involved with us in the acting component? And also, were you at the opening of the Fillmore East? What are your impressions? What are your memories of the beginnings of that opening of that venue?
Yeah, I was a little young to make it from. We were living by Patterson, New Jersey at that point. To get into Manhattan on a regular basis, and getting rides and to get to the Fillmore East. The venue that the earliest venue that I started going to shows at in Manhattan was the Academy of Music,
Right.
which was run by a competitor of Bill's, Ron Delsner. And then, of course, the Capitol Theater in Passaic, New Jersey, John Shear's venue.
Oh my God! But I thought you were you were there? Oh my God! You were totally at the Cap in the early '70s. That place that was a smut house by day.
Yeah, yeah.
Continue.
Yep.
Yeah.
But no, when I was before I got into music as a business, when I was into theater, I really didn't get into Yiddish theater. It was more secular, so to speak, off Broadway stuff, and I didn't really pursue it for very long. Once I got a taste of music and concert productions and concerts, that's the direction that I went in.
When did that? I mean, did that happen?
When I came out to California, what's that?
Well, no, before you moved to California, I've interviewed Cher a couple times. Who was this guy who ran the Academy of Music in Brooklyn? Who were you? What were some of the seminal concerts? Did you see the band there? I mean, who did you see there?
Actually, I saw The Last Waltz. It's one of the first shows that I went to when I first came out to California.
Oh, you were there at Winterland? Holy cow!
Yeah. And that's when I decided I had to work for Bill, because I was just blown away. I mean, I don't even know how we got tickets, because it was sold out, but somehow we got tickets. And as we're waiting in line, there are a couple of people walking up and down the line, giving flowers to the women and handing menus out. And you go inside, and there's a Viennese Waltz orchestra playing and professional dancers dancing, and they set up they fed 3,000 people. I mean, how do you do that? Wait, now what am I talking about? 3,000, 5,000? They almost 5,000 people at Winterland, and then they struck it all and did a concert. And I was like, what? And this guy is walking around with white tails and a top hat and a clipboard. And I said, that's the guy. I mean, this is incredible. I got to work for that guy.
He was wearing a white top hat?
He was wearing white tails and a top hat.
Oh my God. So you were at, and that was essentially the closing of Winterland, right? I mean, that was the last show there?
That was pretty much the closing of Winterland. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't, but it was towards the end of Winterland. Yeah.
Because I've interviewed. What's so interesting is that, like, the Barsotti brothers came out of Berkeley High, and there was a lot of these, like, the Berkeley Community Theater.
Yeah, Sherry Wasserman. Yeah, I mean, there was. That's how it was.
Well, it just leads. It goes back to our original thing about, like, the conception or the idea of music or art as a profession, because, like, there were, like, classes offered in theater and in art, and I know, like, Bob Barsotti took these classes, and then part of it was, like, you had to work the door or backstage at the Berkeley Community Theater, like that. This was like your apprenticeship, and it was like it was pretty remarkable. So, I mean, definitively, did you just walk into Bill's to the office and talk to him? I mean, when did you first connect with him?
So what happened is actually a funny story. So at this point, this is like the early '80s. I don't remember what year. So I'm promoting concerts in Sonoma County. That's where I really started kind of getting it together. So I used to in Petaluma, but the Sebastopol, that's all was my favorite. And then the River Theater in Guerneville became available for lease. And so I talked to a friend of mine who was, because I was still only like 20 years old at this point. So I talked to a friend of mine who was 21 into leasing it with me because she was old enough. And we leased the River Theater, and we'd show movies 5 nights a week and do a couple of shows a month. And I would buy like, $2,000 to $5,000 acts. This is like Jesse Winchester, Jerry Jeff Walker, David Bromberg, that kind of, I mean, the biggest act that I did was I did the Jerry Garcia band.
I knew it from
That was
January
that, that
January
was good.
'83. January '83. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, I don't remember the date. You got a good
It
memory.
was in,
So,
how do you
that's
pronounce
when
it?
by the way, parenthetically, that's when I first met Steve Parrish, and he scared the shit out of me.
Dude, you know what that dude he
Friends
wants to
now.
try to
We're very
kick
good
your
friends now.
hold on a second. That was it was called Gwenerville. What was it called? How do you pronounce the name of the town?
Guerneville.
Guerneville. Because it was
Guerneville.
late '82. October '82. That was the biggest act you. That is so. And then Parrish was. He's always a bully. I'm going to kick his ass if I ever see him. But basically.
Oh, he's a sweetheart. He's a great guy.
I know
He's
he is.
really
No, I
well
mean
out.
he had he
Wonderful man.
So you that was like it was there a dance floor there or was it only seating?
No. There was no proscenium. It was just kind of a round stage in front of the screen, which was curtained, of course, and then 500 seats on a raked floor, and no balcony. There was just a screening room and a projection room upstairs, and I did that for almost 2 years. But then I hit a glass ceiling, and that none of the agents would sell me any talent that was bigger than $5,000 because it was Bill's territory. It was because of Bill. So I wanted to go down and apply for a job, but I didn't know anyone. So, but my girlfriend at the time. So this is a few years after the River Theater. Then, so my girlfriend's mother was a friend of Bill's when he came out to California after the Korean War. Bill wanted to be an actor, and so Bill hooked up. He wanted to be an actor. He hooked up with the meme troupe in San Francisco.
Right.
But they really didn't think he was good enough to act, but. He was a great organizer and very organized and had a good business sense. So they asked him to be the business manager, accepted him, to be the business manager. And also Bill was older than everyone. At this point, Bill's in his mid-30s, and everyone else is in their mid-20s.
Right.
So he's a good 10 years older than everyone. So anyway, she was friends with Bill before he even got into music. And so I asked my girlfriend's mother if she would get me an introduction to Bill Graham Presents. And so she called Bill up and asked Bill if he would give an interview to this fine young Jewish boy that her daughter's going out with. And so I got an interview, and I was hired as the office schlep. And so I took out the garbage and loaded the soda machine and cleaned up the kitchen. And I was lower than the receptionist. I relieved the receptionist when she went to lunch. And one of the things that used to make me the angriest in my job was Jerry Pompioli every day would go into the kitchen and make fruit salad and wouldn't clean up after himself. He would just leave peels and pits and fruit and everything all over the place, because he knew that the schlep would go in there and clean it up. But Jerry and I are friends now.
I love Jerry. No, he's a sweet. I'll send you my interviews with him. He was a sweet guy, man. I like him.
Great guy.
Hold on a second. I want to be clear. This is after you, I don't know what the right leased Guerneville, the River Theater. This is after that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I thought I was like I didn't think I was chopped liver. I didn't think I was I didn't think I was Bill Graham, but I didn't think I was chopped liver either. I went down to apply for a job, and I was expecting to work on concerts.
Sure.
And they hired me for the lowest position that they had available. Lowest
That
position.
is so classic.
Period.
Classic. Hold on.
Yeah,
So what was the?
I did it.
Yeah, of course you did. No, I'm saying you did it, and then at what point? When did the stairway appear to move up, or when did they finally say, well, let's give Morty a crack here?
I kept my mouth shut, and I said, "Well, I'm just going to be the best office schlep they ever had." And so, so I was working, doing that, and then I'd say not quite a year into that. Well, first of all, there was the fire when the building got arsoned, and
what year was that? What year was that?
That was really difficult. Once again, I'm not very good with years.
Okay, so wait, you're saying
mid to late '80s.
So the Bill Graham Presents building was arsoned.
It was arson.
Wow.
And
I don't think I even knew that.
so that was a big shakeup. And so then, we were in temporary housing, and then we bought a building, and so there were like several moves. So I was really involved with that, with the with the office manager at the time. And so there was a lot of work with that, and I did that to the best of my ability, and I think that was appreciated. And then a good friend of mine who was very instrumental in my promoting career in Sonoma County when I was doing shows at the Vets Halls and in Guerneville. He owned a record store in Petaluma called the Music Coop. And back then, you would get co-op sales money from the record companies to run sales on records. And so we would conspire. We would like choose an act that had a new record coming out that got played on the local radio station that this record store advertised on, and got co-op advertising dollars from the record company to advertise a sale on this record at the record on the local radio station. And so he would take that co-op money and use it to promote the concert that I would do of that act, and just tag the end of it also the new record on sale at the Music Group. And I wouldn't have been able to start as a promoter like on a national level without that help, because I didn't have enough money to bankroll the acts and also all the marketing costs and advertising on the radio. So I'm really indebted to John Brennis from the Music Group for doing that. So what were some of those first acts that you conspired on? Yeah, like I say, the David Bromberg, Jerry Jeff Walker, Asleep at the Wheel. These were all like pretty big acts at the time, but they were still like within the $2,000 to $5,000 range for their fees. So anyway, but the reason I bring this up is that John Brennis was friends with the Neville brothers. He was good friends with Art and Aaron Neville.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
And so he said to me when I started working at Bill Graham Presents, he said, the Neville brothers could use some help. They don't have a manager now. Would you be interested? And I was kind of familiar with them and a fan, but it turned out that Bill Graham was a huge fan. So when I approached him with the idea of managing the Neville brothers, he told me to, he said, yeah, go for it. And everyone else in the office was like shocked, because like I was the office schlep. And so what was I doing? Flying to Boulder, flying to Denver, and going to the Neville Brothers show with Huey Lewis in the news.
This is the most. This is warming my heart, because I haven't sent you. This is like right on the sports album for Huey Lewis. So he was doing multiple, amphitheater dates, and the Nevilles opening up, and I flew out to Denver, rented a car, and went up to Boulder, and gave them my pitch, and convinced them to come into the office to meet the rest of all of us, everyone, and follow up when the tour came to San Francisco and played Shoreline. And so when they came in, so the day they were coming into the office to meet with to us, I told Bill about this, and so I'm like frantically working as hard as I can, finishing all my office schlep jobs so that they wouldn't see me being the office schlep when they came into the office for the meeting. So I get everything done, and they show up like just shortly after I get all my responsibilities done. And so I go up to the front and welcome them and bring them into the conference room, and I hustle into Bill's office and say, Bill, they're here. So I'm waiting, and I'm looking at him to get up and come with me back into the conference room. And so he's at his desk, and he picks his head up, he looks at me, and goes, okay, go ahead and start the meeting. I'll be in shortly. And so I'm like, whoa, okay. You had already kind of pitched them in Boulder, right? They were kind of on board already.
That's right.
Yeah. Right.
Well, they were interested, and everyone knew Bill Graham. Everyone knew Bill Graham.
Of course.
Presents,
yeah.
Right?
Of course. Yeah.
So of course, yeah. So they came into the meeting, and so I start the meeting, and I'm talking to them about all the things that I could do for them, and the company could do for them, and I mean, it couldn't have been, of course, because he's Bill, and so it's like, okay, where do we sign? And
wait, hold on. Wait, my Skype just dropped there. Can you please repeat that? What happened there? What happened in that interim there?
Well, so it's just the absolute perfect moment, which of course, Bill had a sixth sense of.
Yeah.
Bill walks into the conference room, and the minute he walks into the conference room, I said it was over. You know, it was like, okay, where do we sign? We're on board for the next one.
Wait, I mean, they just
that kind of guy and that kind of presence, you know. And
I just want to be clear. We're all of them.
The first act that I signed to Bill Graham.
That is what that makes my heart warm because I'll send these interviews to you. I did 2 epic interviews with Charlie Neville, and this is what I don't know if he was at that meeting, but he said.
Yes, he was. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I also interviewed Cyril too. I didn't get to Arthur. I'm still waiting to get to Aaron, but I asked. Charlie was really the free bird out of all those guys. He wound up in Massachusetts. He passed away and things like that. But I said, when was the first time you crossed paths with Miles Davis? And he said to me, in the 1980s. The Neville brothers were being managed by Bill Graham. He was producing these Amnesty International tours. Miles Davis was on a world tour with us. That was the first time I met him. So, lo and behold, Morty Wiggins, that was your first act. That is unreal.
Yeah. But that's a great example. You know, like you brought up Santana and Woodstock. You know, I mean, you know, that was a put. You know, most people don't know, but, you know, Bill booked most of the bands on Woodstock. And, you know, in exchange for doing that, he put Santana on the bill. It wasn't like they gave him a cassette and he listened to it and they said, oh, yeah, this guy's great, let's have him on here. You know, it was a put. And, you know, I mean, that's how the Neville brothers got on the Amnesty tour. The Neville brothers got on the Amnesty tour because Bill put them on it. And, you know, I mean, there were a lot of good political reasons, too, in that, you know, it was mostly white acts. And, you know, a lot of the political prisoners weren't white. They were of color. So it was good to have a band of color on this tour. But it wouldn't have happened unless Bill made it happen. Definitely wouldn't have. All the Grateful Dead shows, opening up for the Grateful Dead, developing that relationship.
Oh, my God, this is so insane. Well, I mean, it was like such a perfect, amazingly organic fit. Just to be clear, who was the one that hipped you who said the Neville brothers are struggling? Who said that to you?
John Brennis, who owned a record store called the Music Group.
How was he hip to that? How did he even know that they were struggling? He just got wind of it, or?
You know, John's a musicologist, you know, and, you know, would go out to Jazz Fest regularly and, you know, was an Aaron Neville fan and, you know.
Right. So he was tight with it.
Those guys were really approachable at that point because, you know, I mean, they were still playing, you know, in bars.
Dude, you are making my day. I have been marinating Cyril and you know, I'm looking to get to Aaron. This story might put it right over the top. This is because there's still, I mean, I guess we could, you know, I've talked to, I mean, Bill Graham goes back, as you know, to, you know, these folkloric days. Leland Sklar, the great bass player, was in a band that Bill was managing. They actually named their band Wolfgang. And, you know, no better way to get on their side of their boss than naming it after their boss. But so Pompili has talked to me about it. Lee, you know, it was this idea, Concord Pavilion. Bill wants to get back quickly. There was a car waiting for him. He jumped in a helicopter. The weather turned nasty, and he died. And you know, I just, not so much focusing on that day, but in your mind, like, when you got the gig to not taking the trash out or cleaning up Pompili's, you know, cherry seeds, but when you got with the Nevilles and continued to carve out your niche, what are the things that you hang on to today? The intangibles, the essence of Bill Graham that is still with you today when you wake up in the morning and try to get motivated to.
Well, you know, relative to the music business.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I mean, you know, just that. I mean, just overall in life. Relentless. He was relentless in his pursuit for excellence. The other thing is just his bravery. I mean, he was incredibly brave in a creative way. I mean, he did some crazy stuff, you know, like doing a Jerry Garcia band on top of, you know, a mountain in Squaw Valley. You know, it's and having people, and having 10,000 people go, attend by going up gondolas, and ski lifts. I mean, he did crazy stuff. He was brave. He was really brave, and he had a pursuit of excellence. The other thing also that I really learned from Bill is, to give people my attention, because everyone deserves, attention. He was also, most people don't know this, but he was an incredible philanthropist. He gave of himself. If there was a cause he believed in, he was first in line. He was first out there, and he gave to a lot of causes, a lot of small charities that, just quietly, no one ever knew. And those. I mean, he used to walk around at concerts with these file cards, making notes. And if he looked at you, pulled out a file card, and started making a note, you shit your pants. You're like, oh.
You're like, what's gonna? Yeah.
What's going on here? What did I? What's missing?
This is great. You're like, what am I going to hear about on Monday morning? I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Because there was, I'm up against. I got another interview coming up right now. Morty, could we do part two? I really had a ball. Could we set up a time to do part two?
Let's exchange emails. We'll find another day and carry on.
Absolutely.
Dude.
It was
talking to you.
Yeah, man. Really an honor. Really an honor, man. Happy New Year, and we'll get it together, man.
Okay. Take care.
Cheers, man.
Bye-bye.
Later. Bye. Thank you to Jim Stern for hipping me to Morty Wiggins, a legendary cat in the music industry, and worked his way up from ground zero. We'll be back with Dennis Grau after this.